everyone, and welcome to another Freedom Side Live on Breakthrough News. I am one of your hosts, Rania Khalek, and today I'm joined by one of my favorite co-hosts, who I get to do it with again today, Zoe Alexandra from People's Dispatch is sitting in for Eugene Puryear, who is traveling right now. Zoe, we're so happy to have you in the hosting chair.
Thanks for having me. I'm not wearing a plaid shirt today, but I hope I can still live up to Eugene's role.
I mean, are you really doing the bare minimum here, Zoe? No plaid shirt.
Sorry about that.
Got on earrings. Got on those earrings. But I do love the fact, though, that we get to have a girl power hour.
Yes, girl power hour has returned. Today? Yes, for sure.
Get ready, folks. Two ladies with big opinions and attitudes.
Exactly.
Not the Chad wife type.
No. You'll never see us there.
We have a fantastic show for you guys today. We've got a lot of important guests, important topics. We're going to be talking to Kurt Hackbarth about the Sham protests in Mexico. We'll get into what was going on down south. And we've got Giorgio Cafiero, who's going to be talking to us about a recent visit by the king of Saudi Arabia. Or no, is he the king? He's not the king.
Prince.
Is he the king? MBS. He's a prince. He's the king in waiting. But he's the actual ruler of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who had me in an intense amount of traffic yesterday, Zoe. I had a live event in DC. And I was late to it because I was sitting in traffic because of MBS. So no thank you to you, sir.
By him.
Another crime by him among many, which we'll be talking to Giorgio about. We're also going to talk to him about last week's visit by another despotic ruler, the new al-Qaeda ruler of Syria. Ahmed al-Sharaa was visiting last week. It's a bit dated, but an important story nonetheless. And then we're going to be turning to Craig Mokhiber, one of our favorite recurring guests as well, human rights lawyer, to discuss the handover of Gaza to Tony Blair and Donald Trump and what that means about our pitiful international system and the UN itself. And then we're going to have some banter, Zoe. Very excited about our banter block. We're going to be talking about Zohran Mamdani and some of the backlash he's getting actually from some people on the left right now for some of the decisions he's making, as well as the ongoing MAGA civil war over Epstein and Israel. Two things that despite the mainstream media's refusal to address it, are actually in fact connected. Mm-hmm. And then we'll also be getting into a bit of the fact that there are some, I guess, leaders, Zionists, who are in leadership positions who feel very strongly that Holocaust education is a bad thing because it's taught people the wrong lessons as they see it. It's taught people that we should not want to kill the week. Oopsies. So
education
we'll
gone wrong.
All that and more. Right. Education gone wrong. So we'll be getting to all that and more. And then before we start the show with one of our first guests, who I think we're still waiting to get him to get on. But as we wait for that, I do want to do my spiel about the fact that, you guys, Breakthrough News is an independent media outlet. And that means that we don't get our money from weapons companies. We don't get our money from pharmaceutical companies. We don't even get our money from BlackRock, whatever the hell that is. We get our money from you, our viewers, our audience, so that we can keep reporting the truth, so that we can keep informing people about the parasitic, horrible, imperialist system that is rotting out our world, so that people can do something about it. So on that note, I want to encourage you to please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. For as little as $5 a month, you can become a member and get access to exclusive content, as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you will be supporting an independent media outlet that I think is doing some of the most important work in the independent media landscape to try to switch the narrative. We're up against an insane corporate media machine that lies. So be a part of our independent media outlet by becoming a member and giving us your money. Also, you can go to breakthroughnews.org and donate there if you want to do one big lump sum. And you can also donate in the live chat. And I also, one thing I should say before we get to Kurt is I want to remind people to make sure you smash that like button.
Smash that
It
like
helps.
button.
It helps boost us in the algorithm that hates us. Yes, YouTube. So make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News. Make sure you hit the bell for notifications. And when you do, make sure all is clicked and not personalized, because I just learned that the personalized bell lets the YouTube algorithm decide if they want you to see us or not. Whereas if you say all, you will always see our content, because we're in a bit of a war with YouTube right now because they don't seem to want to show our massive audience of 1 million subscribers our content. So just a few of you are even seeing it in your recommended pages. On that note, I think, Zoe, unless you have anything you want to add, we can get to the program.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So last weekend, you all may have saw that Mexico saw a wave of violent protests that mainstream corporate media framed as, some spontaneous Gen Z uprising. But there is growing evidence that raises serious questions about who was really driving that unrest. To break that all down, we are joined by one of our favorite recurring guests, Kurt Hackbarth, writer and journalist for Jacobin and host of Soberanía. Is it Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm like butchering. I'm butchering Spanish. Thank you. Which you should all check out, the Mexican Politics podcast. Kurt, sorry I fumbled, but welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. And how do you do, fellow kids? Right? To quote the famous Steve Buscemi meme, which I think is the most apt way to talk about Saturday's AstroTurf March. And let me just point out before we start the look, Rania, I have furniture now. Remember you interviewed me a few months ago?
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, you seem like you were being held hostage because you had no lights.
So there's a little bit of ambiance here.
Well, we're really thrilled that you've been liberated from the hostage situation that we found you in last time when you had just moved. Glad to hear there's furniture in the place. That's very exciting. And on that note, let's get to those AstroTurf protests. Kurt, can you tell us what happened on Saturday? Was this some genuine Gen Z uprising, or was there a bit more to it?
No, it wasn't. That's the short answer. A couple of months ago, nobody was talking about Gen Z in Mexico, right? It just wasn't a term that was part of the parlance here. But you saw, of course, the Jolly Roger flag in Indonesia and in Nepal. And very much like, the raised fist of the 2000s that traveled from, the color revolutions in the former Soviet republics to Venezuela, these things become basically off-the-shelf franchises that if you have enough money, you can just buy the franchise and try to import the color revolution to your country. So that's very much what happened with, the Jolly Roger flag here in one piece, right? What instigated this march was actually a sad event, a tragic event, which was the assassination of the mayor of the town of Uruapan in Michoacan, Carlos Manso. There is an important conversation to be had about security in Mexico, in the context of a U.S.-fueled drug war, right? Claudia Sheinbaum's government in 1 year has managed to bring homicides down 37%. But of course, throwing statistics at people who are in difficult situations, is not, the most sensitive way to handle a situation. So we know that there's an important conversation to be had about how to handle security in Mexico in the context of, drug demand from the United States and arms coming from the United States. That said, the march itself was, a totally an AstroTurfed event, right? You saw these supposed Gen Z social media accounts pumping out, clearly artificially intelligence-made videos of instigating violence, with images of National Palace, what you're seeing on the screen up in flames, the cathedral up in flames, wanted dead or alive signs for Claudia Sheinbaum and for Lopez Obrador, right? So there was a clear attempt, and how ironic that this was supposedly a march against violence, instigating violence. There was an attempt to portray this as a spontaneous youth uprising, along the lines of, other countries we've seen with more or less degrees of, organicness to it. So we go to cover the march on Saturday, and we were looking around for the young people. There hardly were any. There really weren't. CNN managed to find a couple, right, to kind of bolster their narrative. But let's take it kind of in two parts. The first part of the march was very much along the lines of previous opposition marches that we've seen over the years under basically the slogan of the Maria Rosa, the pink tide, right? Very much middle to upper middle class, skewing towards the elderly. Remember, this was a march that was held on a Saturday. Working class people in Mexico work on Saturday. They work either half or whole days because they have a 48-hour work week, which is something the left is trying to change here. So just by the fact that the march was on a Saturday, you know that the march wasn't for them. And it was very clearly a middle and upper middle class crowd along the lines of the Maria Rosa. So we interviewed a bunch of them. You can check out the interviews on our Soberanía podcast, actually organic social media. And they were very much along the lines of what we call in Mexico the tias panistas, which in English would be your kind of loopy aunt, the ones kind of at the Thanksgiving dinner table when, just come out with this just kind of crazy stuff. And you're like, did she just say that? Kind of that kind of demographic, right? Of the tias panistas, right? Fustigating against, all the ills they see in Mexico. And it's funny that the slogans, kind of the whole issue of Carlos Manso got lost amongst, anti-Morena sloganing, really nasty, insulting stuff about Claudia Sheinbaum, her anatomy, her religion, her ethnicity, just really kind of nasty, nasty stuff. There were Nazi elements actually in the Zocalo itself. The far right was out, right? So there was all of that in there. So the whole ostensible issue of Carlos Manso got lost in there. Now, had there been a speaker in the Zocalo to maybe kind of channel the demands or kind of bring things together, because, okay, there's a march. People, you can't control who goes to a march. Sometimes people say different things. If there had been a speaker there, maybe they could channel the demands and kind of unify voices to say, we're demanding this. But there weren't any speakers. There weren't any speakers because the whole point of the march was not to, unify demands, but to create the kind of scenes you're seeing on the screen now. And that's when the second part of the march comes in, right? The first part of the march was the tias panistas in the back, right? Average age about 62, right? But when you got to the
Gen Zers,
the Gen Zers, the fellow kids with their skateboards, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, check out our interviews on Soberanía. You can see some of them, and kind of they go off. Like, Trump would be so much a better president for Mexico than Sheinbaum. I mean, just off the wall stuff, right? And they're saying because López Obrador and Biden let in immigrants. It's like, what country are you talking from here? Anyway, go check it. But when you got to the Zocalo, things changed. Things changed. And we saw, running along the sidewalk to get ahead of everybody else were a bunch of basically kind of shock contingents, clearly paid with very special tools, right? With which they, got into the front and were sawing away to separate those barriers you see that were protecting National Palace. Now you see some voices saying, oh, well, Morena's scared. Why were they putting barriers in front of National Palace? They always put barriers up at every march. It wasn't just this march. They do it at every march, and they do it to protect, architectural monuments, right? And they also do it to protect people from themselves, right? Because, sometimes people get out of hand. They start, trying to knock things down, burn things, and they wind up hurting themselves. So the barriers are always there at every march, every kind of march. So they separated the barriers, and then they started going after the police with some of that heavy tools, right? So the police, responded to the extent, that they could. And there you go. That's what they wanted. They wanted to produce those kinds of scenes for international consumption, for Alex Jones and all those accounts to say, look, Mexico is in an unstable position. Look what's happening. The youth are rising up. And of course, the United States always creates the problem for which they then sell the solution. And the solution is, let us intervene. Just say the word. And right on cue, you saw Donald Trump saying, I'm not happy with Mexico. And you saw the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, tweeting out, "Hello, we'll only help if you want it. Just say the word." It was all very well orchestrated.
Yeah, Kurt, I think it's amazing that independent journalists like yourself were out there on Saturday because it was so important to actually hear from people who were there and hear what they had to say. An independent journalist, Meme Yamel, was on the streets and
Yeah.
she did an interview which really shook me. She was speaking to a young man who was saying, all sorts of things. And he started to say that the sexual assault that Claudia Sheinbaum suffered, which was actually on video, and for which she has filed a, legal denunciation for, and she made an incredible speech about how this is for all of the women in Mexico, how we can't tolerate this. And there were protesters saying, that was a simulation. And we saw so many other kind of crazy claims there. And of course, with, the simulation thing, there's a lot of misogyny to unpack. Interestingly enough, no one seems to care about the anti-Semitism that's been waged against Claudia Sheinbaum. Somehow now anti-Semitism.
I've been waiting. Yeah. I've been waiting for the Jonathan Greenblatt's, the ADL. I'm sure he's going to speak on it any day now.
Yeah. I'm sure that's coming right up. Right?
It's coming up. It's coming up.
It's what they painted on the door of National Palace. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of the many things that it just, these desperate, insane claims. I mean, what do you make of this? That, in the reality, there's 70% approval rating of Claudia Sheinbaum and these kind of insane, desperate claims that people are kind of repeating as if they're these parrots. So, what's really happening here? What are they trying to do? What is the attempt to kind of sow these lies about Morena and especially Claudia Sheinbaum?
Here's the story, and it's so important that you bring this up because a lot of the chants and sloganing I was hearing on Saturday were misogynist slogans against Claudia Sheinbaum. Very explicit, too. Very nasty stuff. Right? Here's what's behind that, at least in part. We've talked about on other interviews on this show that Mexico has passed recently a judicial reform, right, which provides for the free direct election of all of the federal judiciary, including a new Supreme Court. So the federal judiciary is no longer in the pocket of the Mexican oligarchy, as it's been for basically ever. Right? So now you have the owner of the second largest television station in Mexico, Ricardo Salinas Pliego, and his Grupo Electra, and his Grupo Salinas, with a huge back tax bill of over $3 billion that the Supreme Court just finally threw out his last attempt to stop that, right? Just a few days ago, right? The new Supreme Court.
Coincidental.
And he's furious. He's furious about this. And so, it's a pretty direct line. You don't have to, see a lot of twists and turns in this. Ricardo Salinas Pliego, through his TV Azteca television channel, has been trying to whip this up in the most naked, bald class war fashion, right? We're going to try to whip up, right, a false AstroTurf destabilization attempt, which, even if it doesn't work on the ground, will create the international footage that we need to try to push our agenda forward. And he's been very clear on that, right? One of his, his attack dogs were there on Saturday, of course, with bodyguards, right? So that's a really important part of the puzzle that the Western corporate media is not telling you. Right? That, you've got Ricardo Salinas Pliego there who is whipping this up. And this is not recent, right? You see far-right media like La Derecha Diario, which is run by a far-right Argentine, Javier Negre, right? Part of the Milei crowd. They were glorifying on Saturday the attempt to beat that policeman with this huge gash in his head. I mean, they were whipping that up, saying, "Look at the narco happening in this narco government, this narco state, this narco everything." So it's an international network. It's Mileism, it's La Derecha Diario, it's CPAC, it's the Atlas Network, right? It's huge amounts of bot farms coming in from, Argentina, Spain, other countries, right? So once they select their target, it all comes in. And it's interesting, too, that it just came out yesterday that one of the supposed nonpartisan youth leaders by the name of Edson Andrade is in the pay of the conservative right-wing party here, the PAN, and not a little bit of money. He has a contract this year for $115,000 for social media work for the PAN party. Quite the nonpartisan youth, right? Right there. So there you go. I mean, this is really very clearly an astroturfed, non-event event, with conservative parties behind it, and with TV Azteca, with Ricardo Salinas Pliego, and with the egging on, if not the overt participation of United States elements. Let us not forget, just to conclude the point, who's the U.S. ambassador in Mexico right now? Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson is an ex-Green Beret and an ex-CIA. That's exactly what the Green Berets do. That's exactly what they do. Unconventional warfare, PSYOP. That is exactly the mission of the Green Berets.
So good at it too.
And and the Green Berets work very closely with the CIA. So it was a very natural jumping off point for Ron Johnson, after participating in the El Salvador Civil War in the 80s, to jump into the CIA and continue his murderous career. So he's been a very high-profile ambassador here, because the kind of stuff he does is stuff that happens behind closed doors.
It's really incredible, Kurt. I mean, I'm just thinking about the fact that I saw Alex Jones going wild for these protests. He was so excited, and all I could think to myself was, Alex Jones, the guy who literally thinks everything is the CIA, but the one time it's the CIA,
the one time he's right.
The one time it's the CIA, the CIA's,
thing.
Turning the frogs gay with bad water, but like, if you ask Alex Jones. But the protests in Mexico are actually legitimate. Anyways, Kurt, I want to thank you for joining us to break all this down. Super important, because based on the entire network you just described, this is clearly going to be an ongoing struggle, ongoing AstroTurf protests. I'm sure we're going to see more of it. So I'm sure we'll be talking to you again in the near future about it all. Kurt Hackbarth, writer and journalist for Jacobin Magazine and host of say the name of the podcast.
Soberanía.
And just very quickly, guys, there's a bit of good news here. There's a bit of good news. They were threatening to do a copycat protest today, and just a handful of people showed up. So,
Oh, there you go.
Love to see it.
You can only AstroTurf so much, yeah.
That's right. People just get tired, right? The old ladies have to go to brunch, and they don't want to get sunburned. So.
Got to go get some nutrients, ladies. All right, Kurt, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Well, there you have it, guys. Yet another AstroTurf protest. We weren't born yesterday. We've seen it everywhere. Now it's happening in Mexico, and it's going to happen again. But I'm glad you got breakthrough news to tell you what's actually going on. Zoe, do you have anything you want to add before we move on to our next guest and topic?
No, I mean, people should watch the videos of kind of these people talking to cameras, because it is really nuts. It's like they want Donald Trump to be their president. They're like so misogynist. It is a good reminder that even if you're a president, you are still it's pretty horrifying. But I mean, Claudia Sheinbaum gave some really good reactions to it, and I think it was.
And since we're on together, Zoe, we should remind everybody that the two of us, me and you, these two Girl Power Hour ladies, interviewed. We got to interview Claudia Sheinbaum in 2023, early 2023, before she became president of Mexico. So that was a really good interview. You can go check it out on the Breakthrough News and People's Dispatch YouTube pages. If you look it up, just look up Breakthrough News Claudia Sheinbaum, and you'll see our excellent interview with the woman who is now facing down right-wing AstroTurf protests, which we will continue to cover on this program. That being said, we now want to move on to our next topic, and that is related to the fact that just this week, President Trump welcomed Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the White House. And it was quite the exchange we saw between the two of them. In front of reporters, Trump defended MBS against U.S. intelligence claims that he ordered the chopping up of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, while formerly designating Saudi Arabia a major non-NATO ally. And the visit also follows Trump's meeting with Syria's Ahmed al-Sharaa, the self-appointed president and former ISIS and al-Qaeda leader. and also follows the Palestinian Authority's endorsement of Washington's Gaza occupation plan, which we'll be talking more about, but it was happening in the backdrop of that. So with all that said, I'd like to welcome our guest, Giorgio Cafiero, CEO of Gulf State Analytics, who's joining us to explain how these moves reveal the region's authoritarian governments deepening their subservience to the U.S., despite widespread public outrage at everything happening in the region and the world at the moment. So, Giorgio, welcome back to the Freedom Side Live, today hosted by me and Zoe Alexandra, sitting in for Eugene Puryear, not to confuse you.
It's good to be with you guys.
So, Giorgio, a lot has happened in just the last couple of weeks. I wanted to start off by playing a couple of clips from the press conference we saw MBS and Donald Trump hold, I believe, in the Oval Office. And so this was quite the interesting exchange. A lot of these clips went viral, but it's worth showing them. The first clip, which John is going to put up, is of them reacting to actually a really good question from a reporter about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
He's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
It's just you ask, Mr. President,
please,
you allow me to answer. I feel painful about,
I can't even listen to him talk. So that was one. And then Giorgio, he was also, there was also a question about Saudi Arabia's human rights record. I was actually quite impressed with the press corps in the office that day, or in the Oval Office that day. And let's go ahead and play the response to the question about human rights.
I'm very proud of the job he's done. What he's done is incredible in terms of human rights and everything else. And he's the crown prince, the future king. And I just want to pay my greatest respect to your father, the king, who is an amazing man. I met him early on. He greeted me at the airport at an age that was pretty high up there, and it was about 117 degrees, and he was standing on the red carpet as I came out of the plane. And he's amazing. And when I met his brilliant son, it was at the Oval Office. Shortly thereafter, you came in representing the country, and I called the father. I said, this guy is fantastic. And I don't know if that helped you or hurt you, but obviously it couldn't have hurt too much, because here you are, right?
I mean, you know what, Giorgio, I'm just going to hand it off to you. I mean, I know those are just shocking clips. I'm sure you've already seen them. But what are your, I guess, general thoughts about this meeting that took place and the just total whitewashing of the record of Saudi Arabia, of the fact, just like things happen. Jamal Khashoggi got chopped up, a journalist. Things happen amidst, the backdrop of all the horrors we're seeing in the region today.
Yeah, so after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in October 2018, Saudi Arabia was quite isolated from Western governments, and Mohammed bin Salman did not travel to Western countries for a number of years. And at the beginning of the Biden presidency, let's go back to the campaign, 2019-2020, Biden pledged to treat Saudi Arabia as a so-called pariah state, and he vowed to only communicate with the king of Saudi Arabia, who is Mohammed bin Salman's father, not MBS, who is still the crown prince. But over the years, MBS has rehabilitated. And the fact of the matter is, in terms of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, this rehabilitation got started with Joe Biden, went to Jeddah in July 2022, and did the famous fist bump with Mohammed bin Salman when he arrived in the kingdom. The general view in the United States is that as much as we may have a problem with certain aspects of Mohammed bin Salman, particularly his alleged role in the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, Saudi Arabia is a country that's too important to not work with. And I think one could say that whereas Zelensky came to the White House earlier this year and Trump did not see him as a leader with any cards in his hand, Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, has many cards. And the view in Washington is that Saudi Arabia is a country the U.S. must work with, regardless of who the leader is. And so there is a general willingness I'm not saying that it's ethical, but I just think speaking about the reality of the situation is that the establishment in Washington is, for the most part, willing to just simply look past the Khashoggi murder and focus on doing business with Saudi Arabia. And MBS's visit to Washington really symbolizes this trend. But I want to emphasize that his visit was not a turning point necessarily. It was a continuation of this rehabilitation trend that started years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because within the region, of course, Saudi Arabia has played kind of a back and forth role, especially in the past 2 years during Israel's genocide in Gaza. We've seen Saudi Arabia pay some lip service, in word only say, we're not going to go forward with normalization, releasing statements, participating in these different multilateral forums and condemning Israel's actions. But at the same time, which we're going to get to the Gaza deal a bit later with our another guest, but the Gulf states have been crucial in giving kind of this legitimization to Trump's plan. Saudi Arabia now does look like it is going forward with some sort of rapprochement with Israel. And it seems like Trump is happy to have Saudi Arabia on his team. Israel is not so happy that Saudi Arabia is getting the goods, as they say, because they protested and they were concerned. They were concerned about Trump selling F-35s to Israel. So there's this kind of triangle, we could say, between Israel, Saudi Arabia, United States, Trump kind of playing both powers to see who's going to give him better conditions. I don't know. What do you make of this kind of tension between these three powers and the role that Saudi plays in this moment?
Well, Saudi Arabia, like the vast majority of Arab states, maybe at this point we could say like every single Arab state, is a non-confrontational actor in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and Saudi Arabia in no way is posing a threat to Israel. That being said, Saudi Arabia does perceive Israel's behavior to be threatening to regional stability. The Saudis would like to see the Trump administration put a lot more pressure on Israel, really want to see Washington rein Israel in and put pressure on Israel to end its rather unhinged borderless aggression that has, about 2 months ago, it even came into the GCC with the attack on Doha, which I was speaking about on this program back in September. So obviously, Saudi Arabia is not happy with the fact that Trump has given so much support to Israel, just as they were not happy with Biden's policies toward Israel after October 7th. But what the Saudis have made clear is that they are not going to normalize with Israel until a Palestinian state is established, or at least there are steps taken that indicate that Israel is serious about moving in the direction of a two-state solution. We know that Israel is not going to agree to this. So the Saudis have basically taken Israeli normalization off the table. And I think between Trump and MBS, as we saw in this recent visit, Palestine is not a central issue in the bilateral relationship. The focus is really on AI, nuclear cooperation, critical minerals. Even Sudan, I think, was probably a bigger file than Gaza. And I'll just wrap this up by saying that at this point, I think Saudi Arabia and the Trump administration have sort of come to a point of being willing to accommodate the other's position on Gaza. The Saudis see the 20-point peace initiative as flawed, very imperfect, but they're willing to sort of give it an endorsement if it means a halting of Israeli bombing of Gaza. Likewise, the Trump team would love to see Saudi Arabia enter the Abraham Accords, but I think the Trump administration has basically come around to understand that Mohammed bin Salman is not in a position to bring his country into a normalization agreement after 2 years of genocide in Gaza. So I think Trump and the Saudis have Trump and the Saudi leadership, I want to say, have really kind of agreed to disagree to some extent, and they have chosen to basically accommodate the other's position on Gaza.
And on that note, I want to turn to another visitor that we had in Washington, D.C. last week, and that was Ahmed al-Shara, the self-appointed president of Syria, former al-Qaeda leader. I want to play a clip again to introduce that part of this segment. And this is a clip of Trump talking about Ahmed al-Shara. Let's watch it.
Them joining the anti-ISIS.
Yeah, you can expect some announcements on Syria. We want to see Syria become a country that's very successful, and I think this leader can do it. I really do. I think this leader can do it. And people said he's had a rough past. We've all had rough pasts, but he has had a rough past, and I think, frankly, if you didn't have a rough past, you wouldn't have a chance. He gets along very well with Turkey, with President Erdogan, who's a great leader. Erdogan's a great leader.
A rough past. Did you hear that? A rough past. And when he's talking about, it's incredible too, because the same guy, Donald Trump, is also like Zohran Mamdani, because he wants to raise the corporate tax rate by 2%. And he's Muslim, is basically a jihadist who's terrifying, and he's pro-Palestine, so really big jihadist, right? Meanwhile, Ahmed al-Shara, formerly known as Mohammed al-Jolani, literally was dispatched to Syria by ISIS. Okay, this guy started al-Nusra in Syria, which was the Syrian al-Qaeda affiliate. He carried out terrorist attacks across Syria and Lebanon. He literally, I don't think this is what makes him a terrorist, but he fought the American occupiers in Iraq, So like it's just for people like Donald Trump and Brian Mast and all these crazy Islamophobes to be embracing a former Al-Qaeda leader is so insane. Rough pass. I mean, give me a break. But even more than that, I'm curious if you could maybe touch on, before we wrap up here, Giorgio, on the fact that, this was a big deal for Ahmed al-Shara to visit the White House, to visit with Donald Trump, to be embraced by the American political elites. Syria is, this big black hole of rubble. Its economy is destroyed from years of sanctions and a U.S.-backed regime change war. The U.S. basically got its way. And now Ahmed al-Shara is trying desperately to normalize with Israel because he sees that as a pathway to Syria becoming a more, economically prosperous country, I think, while also still his forces are massacring minorities. So I guess, what do you make of this visit by Ahmed al-Shara, again, in the midst of this backdrop of what happened with Gaza?
Yeah, obviously Trump as a president has been very much in favor of working with al-Shara, viewing him as a legitimate head of state. We should point out that there were many, or at least some figures in the Trump administration who were not in favor of this, and they were very aligned with the Israel view that al-Shara is someone who could not be trusted. What we've seen here is that the Gulf states and Turkey have been very successful in terms of head of state who deserves to be given a chance. And I think this is a case where the Gulf states and Israel have conflicting interests. By the way, is the connection working, or am I cutting out?
There was a bit of a lag and cut, but we can hear you okay now.
Okay, I don't know how much of what I said went
we heard it
through, but I think when we talk about the Gulf states, as I was saying, have played a very key role in persuading Trump that it's necessary to work with al-Shara, and despite his background with these extremist groups in the region, in Iraq and Syria, he is now a leader who the U.S. should be working with. Definitely, Shara has done quite a bit to try to earn support.
Oh, I think that we've lost Giorgio. Oh, wait, his connection is just unfortunately not working. I'm really sorry about that, you guys. We do, however, have our next guest ready to go. So I think we might just have to move on from that story for now, because the internet is being funky. Zoe, I always get confused. I live in Lebanon, and I understand when there's internet hiccups there. I do not understand when there's internet hiccups in this country. richest country in the freaking world. You have 1,000 military bases all around the world to make your country the richest country in the world. And you can't have good internet. Like, I don't get it.
You dominate all the undersea cables. You don't let anyone else have good internet. I just have to laugh a little more, though, about the rough past.
Yeah.
That's like the biggest euphemism I've ever heard in my entire life. Imagine being a literal Al-Qaeda leader and having a rough past.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a rough past. Like, as if he just like had like a couple bad relationships that didn't go so well. You know,
Jeffrey Epstein, another guy with a rough past.
Rough past, right? I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer, like, rough past. Yeah, gosh. Okay, so I think we're gonna have to go ahead and go to our next story here. I'm sorry about that. We'll have to get Giorgio back on at a future date to finish discussing the former Al Qaeda leader, now turned Syrian president, discussing his rough patch. But now we are going to turn to our next story. This week, as many of you saw, the United Nations Security Council voted to pass a resolution that effectively hands the U.S. control over Gaza. Here to discuss what this colonial plan means for Palestine and the horrific absurdity of granting authority over Gaza to a co-perpetrator of the ongoing genocide there. We're joined by Craig Mokhiber, a longtime human rights lawyer. Craig, welcome back to Breakthrough News Live. Oh, Craig is muted. I guess there we go. The tech is just not working with us. Is he muted on our side or his side?
I think I'm unmuted now.
Ooh.
Okay, we can hear you. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I was just saying, great segue. I also have a rough past, so that was a very good segue.
I hope it's not the same kind of rough past as Ahmed al-Shara, but you know what? Whatever you did is totally forgivable, because apparently what he did is forgivable. So,
and he's a great man.
The bar is low.
We're all great men here.
Low. We're all great men here. We don't want to write people off. But in all seriousness, Craig, I mean, you just wrote a fantastic piece people should go read for Mondo Weiss called the UN Embraces Colonialism, Unpacking the Security Council's Mandate for the U.S. Colonial Administration of Gaza. So I guess I'm going to ask you if you can maybe give us the highlights of that. Can you explain to us what this UN Security Council resolution was, basically the details? What does it mean for Gaza, and what is so colonial about it?
Everything about it is colonial. It is really an act of 19th century colonialism that's been given a UN stamp of approval. And I've been saying, you know, what the Security Council has done here should terrify not just the people of Palestine, but everyone. The Security Council is this body that is basically unaccountable. You know, there's no judicial review. There's no form of review over the actions of the Security Council. It has this awesome power for the use of force to impose its will through violence against countries and peoples against their will. And if it is unbound by international law and by the rules of the UN Charter, it becomes a rogue institution that is, ironically, a threat to international peace and security, a threat to the human rights of people around the world. And what happened on Monday was it demonstrated that it was indeed capable of acting as a rogue entity directly in conflict with the rules of international law and imposing what is effectively a colonial administration and a hostile foreign occupation superimposed on top of the existing occupation of Palestine with the adoption of this historically terrible resolution in the Security Council. I am, all these days later, still stunned that this thing has actually happened. Imagine, Rania, that for more than 2 years, the Security Council, which was the only international body that has enforcement power, that could have done something about the genocide, it has been unable and unwilling for more than 2 years because of the use of the veto to defend Palestinian human rights. Now, in one day, when all it would take is a veto to stop the violation of Palestinian human rights with this resolution, the veto was nowhere to be found. And so you had 13 members of the Security Council vote yes, 2 of the permanent members, China and Russia, abstain and not use their vetoes to stop this unlawful rogue action by the Security Council. That can pass. The Council can act to violate Palestinian human rights. It cannot act to protect them. So what it has done effectively, in violation of international law again, it has handed control of Gaza and the survivors of the genocide over to the United States, a co-perpetrator of the genocide, which will include consultations with Israel, the other co-perpetrator of the genocide, and gives participation in decision-making to those two. It's led by the US in consultation with the Israelis. And the Palestinians are to be granted no such participation in decisions about their own rights, their own governance, and their own lives. Which means that something very dangerous has happened here, which is that the Security Council has become a mechanism, an instrument for the continued unlawful occupation of Palestine and a weapon of US oppression there. And I said in my article in Mondoweiss that not since the UN purported to partition Palestine in 1947 against the will of the indigenous people, setting the stage for 80 years of Nakba, has the UN acted in such a baldly colonial, unlawful, and ultra vires way and trampled so recklessly on the rights of a people. It is outrageous. It creates a board of peace headed by Donald Trump himself with his Orwellian name, Board of Peace, which is a colonial body that will govern Palestine, Gaza. And it creates a proxy occupation force that they call an international stabilization force to occupy Gaza on behalf of, under the direction of Donald Trump and his colonial board. And all of that is to happen under the direction of Donald Trump and in consultation with the Israeli regime. That's why I've called this a day of shame for the United Nations and for all 15 members of the UN Security Council, many of which have provided rhetorical support to the Palestinians when it was politically convenient for them, but didn't do a damn thing to stop this atrocity in the UN Security Council.
You know, Craig, I think you mentioned this, and it's interesting because the UNSC has really been kind of the body that people keep coming back to in terms of resolutions regarding what's happening in Gaza. We've actually seen several, despite the fact that the United States vetoed so many ceasefire resolutions, there were important UNSC resolutions that were passed regarding the delivery of aid, all of which seem to be completely ignored, not implemented. And I guess I'm wondering, Israel has never really respected any of the UNSC resolutions, let alone, of course, the other UN body resolutions. And so, what is the possibility of this actually being implemented? Is this a resolution that will, in fact, have a concrete, manifestation? The Palestinian resistance groups have already said that they are in complete opposition to this plan, despite the fact that, the Palestinian Authority has endorsed it. Is this a resolution that is going to translate into kind of a material reality? Is there going to be a U.S., Tony Blair, Donald Trump run administration in Gaza?
They are deadly serious about taking over Gaza for their nefarious purposes and for the personal benefit of Donald Trump and Tony Blair and Jared Kushner and others who are involved in this scheme. So no doubt about it. Remember that past Security Council resolutions have called upon others to do something. This resolution authorizes Trump to do something. So it is given a UN stamp of approval and the veneer of legality, although I continue to argue that it is unlawful, but the veneer of legality to Donald Trump and his cronies to force their way into Gaza, to seize control and to impose the terms of this horrific resolution. So this is very different from past resolutions of the Security Council on this matter. Secondly, the previous things that had gotten through the Security Council were opposed by the Israeli regime. This is a resolution drafted entirely to the benefit of the Israeli regime. I mean, just think about it. 2 years of genocide. Normally what happens, an international institution responding to a genocide will adopt a resolution to hold the perpetrator accountable, provide redress to the victims. What this resolution does is it further disempowers and punishes the survivors of the genocide, and it rewards in very concrete ways is the Israeli regime as the perpetrator of the genocide. Israel gets everything it wants in this resolution. I mean, this resolution is so directly in contradiction of international law, including the most recent decisions of the International Court of Justice, that it is an Israeli dream that this was actually passed. And we can talk about how it was passed, but this is not going to see resistance. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said there will not be a Palestinian state, and he said it in connection with this resolution. Well, guess what? This resolution also doesn't promise a Palestinian state. And to the contrary, it directly contradicts what the International Court of Justice has been saying. And it reinforces the impunity of the Israeli regime, even as the genocide continues. So, for example, the International Court of Justice has said that the Palestinian people have a right to self-determination on their land. This resolution strips that away and even empowers hostile foreign forces to govern them against their will. And despite the court's findings that Gaza, as well as the West Bank and East Jerusalem, are illegally occupied and that the occupation must end quickly and completely, this resolution erases what international law in the court says, and it explicitly extends the Israeli occupation in Gaza, and it endorses the indefinite presence of Israeli regime troops, especially in the perimeter inside Gaza, and then superimposes a second layer of occupation, a U.S. occupation on top of it. So the other co-perpetrator of the genocide and principal sponsor of Israel is now occupying Gaza alongside the Israeli regime. And then one of the most important things that the court decided last year is that after 3 decades of Oslo denying the rights of the Palestinians and telling them they have to negotiate for their rights with their oppressor, the court ruled that is not the case. It said that those rights are not conditional. Those rights are inalienable. They don't have to negotiate for them, and they're not subject to any agreement or political process that trumps those rights. Well, this resolution nullifies that. It effectively says that any of those rights don't belong to the Palestinians, and it assigns them to the discretion of the United States and its Israeli and other partners in this scheme. And then even in the middle of an ongoing genocide by an apartheid regime, and the court has found that the Israeli regime practices apartheid and racial segregation. It's on trial for genocide. That is found to be already plausible. A series of provisional measures. All of that is wiped away with this resolution that never mentions genocide, never mentions apartheid, never mentions colonization, never mentions, as I've written, the thousands of Palestinians still held in Israeli torture and death camps, as we speak. And look at every other international resolution in the wake of a genocide or mass atrocities. The legal requirement of accountability for perpetrators and redress for victims, nowhere to be found. In fact, it completely reverses that legal paradigm, providing further rewards for the Israeli regime and further punishment for the Palestinians and further stripping of their rights. And one example of the reward that it gives to the Israeli regime, the court has said that Israel is legally obliged to provide compensation and reparations for the harms and damage that it's done. By the way, they ruled the same thing about the West Bank as well, in addition to Gaza. And what this resolution does, again, supported by 15, all 15 members of the Security Council, 2 abstentions, no vetoes. It says that, that's no longer Israel's responsibility. That's the responsibility of international donors and international financial institutions like the World Bank in what I have said is a multi-billion-dollar bailout of the Israeli regime in the midst of a genocide. And then further normalization, further impunity. This is outrageous. It is a dream for the Israeli regime. It is a nightmare, not just for the Palestinians, but for anyone who is aware of the damage that can be done with this precedent, with a rogue Security Council, with the use of force at its disposal, operating outside and against the boundaries of international law.
Yeah, you call it the resolution from hell, and you've listed many of the reasons why. And you also talk about this armed occupation force, proxy occupation force, the International Stabilization Force, which would operate under this Trump-headed Board of Peace. And you note that the mission of this proxy occupation force would be to control, contain, and disarm the population victimized by genocide, not the regime perpetrating it, and to ensure security not for the victims of the genocide, but for its perpetrators. It would be done, of course, in collaboration with the Israelis and the Egyptians, collaborationist regime as well. But what's interesting about this is, Craig, it's crazy now. Nobody vetoed this. I think one of the most, everybody was talking a lot about China and Russia. China and Russia abstained, and I want to hear your thoughts on the fact that they abstained rather than vetoed. But a lot of people were making the argument that the reason that happened is because this was endorsed by the Palestinian Authority. Therefore, Palestinian leadership endorsed this. But as you note in your piece, the actual reality is that this resolution was rejected strongly by Palestinian civil society and almost all Palestinian political and resistance factions and human rights defenders and international law experts from all around the world. And the Palestinian Authority is a Quisling authority. It is one that is funded and it's literally exists because of the U.S. and Israel. It works with the U.S. and Israel. It does not represent the will of the Palestinian people. All that's to say, that was the excuse used for why all these Muslim and Arab countries had no choice but to endorse this and work with it. I was even shocked to see Algeria voting for this resolution. I mean, this might be the first resolution ever of colonialism that Algeria has voted for. So I guess, can you just talk about your general thoughts about the world's unwillingness? No country stood up to this. And I mean, you can say that an abstention is standing up to it, but I don't think an abstention is standing up to it. I think China and Russia displayed extreme cowardice in voting for a resolution that they themselves said they were actually opposed to. Or I'm sorry, abstaining from.
Yeah, worse than cowardice. I think it was transactional immorality. They made other deals. So this is what I've been calling a perfect storm of complicity. And even so, with all of this, none of this excuses the behavior of these 15 members of the council. Remember, this was a U.S. initiative as a co-perpetrator of the genocide. So there's one member of the council, a permanent member. Two other permanent members of the council, the UK and France, have been complicit in the genocide, and so they were easy to go along because this is in their own nefarious interest. Then you have countries like Russia and China, as you say, that could have and should have vetoed this, and that made statements basically criticizing every aspect of it, but didn't have the principle to actually stand up to it, and only abstained. Russia, as this was happening in the midst of sensitive negotiations with Donald Trump and the Americans on Ukraine, and then we see right after that, they come out with a statement that Trump has a 24-point peace plan that would allow Russia to retain the territory in Ukraine that it wants to retain. So you can see where Russia's priorities were, and the Palestinians had nothing to offer but their human rights, and so they got traded away. China, in the midst of extremely sensitive negotiations on trade and tariffs with the United States that are highly important to them, they also were willing to trade away the rights of the Palestinian people. Then you had the other delegations, and you had the U.S. ambassador and the U.S. administration repeatedly using language that effectively was coded language for, if you don't adopt this, we will unleash the dogs of genocide for accelerated genocide again in Gaza. So it's either this or we're just going to totally finish the job unconstrained. And if you adopt this, maybe there'll be some humanitarian aid and some other factors, although that's another problem with the way that is worded. So that basically, I've been saying that Donald Trump learned a lot from his principal mentor, Roy Cohn, who was a mafia lawyer and operative, who taught him how to fight dirty battles like this. The U.S. has always fights dirty battles in diplomacy. I keep saying this over and over again, but it's a key insight from inside the UN. U.S. diplomats are generally not very skilled in diplomacy. And the reason for, they're often very clumsy and coarse and aggressive. And the reason for that is because they don't need diplomatic skill. They have power. So they have carrot and sticks that they can deploy to try to press a vote to go in the way that they want it to go. And diplomats in New York are reporting that they applied the most extreme version of that they had ever seen in this particular resolution on behalf of the Israeli regime for the U.S. to push this through. And so the threats and inducements that they applied were unprecedented in this case. So there's that in the way that was deployed. And then you have what you mentioned, the betrayal of the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority, as we know, has no legitimacy. Opinion polls reveal this. They don't answer to the Palestinian people. They operate as a mechanism of occupation, effectively. They also operate under occupation, which means they don't have any discretion to push things that the Israelis don't want them to push. They also are under the thumb of Washington and the Americans. They rely for their funding on Europe and the Gulf monarchies. So the Palestinian Authority can very easily be aligned to the cause of the US empire and the Israeli occupation, and that's precisely what they did. They encouraged all of these states to support the resolution and not to veto it. And so when Russia or China or Europe or Latin America or Africa go and ask the Palestinians what they should do, they're going to the UN mission in New York, which on paper, that's the state of Palestine. The foreign policy is determined by the PLO, and the PA is this administration, this occupation administration in Ramallah. But in reality, the PA and Mahmoud Abbas and the same people control all three of those. So there is no independent foreign policy. So even as before the vote, you heard from Palestinian civil society, Palestinian human rights groups, Palestinian political factions, except for Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah, all of the resistance groups, all rejecting this. These member states are being told this is the position of Palestine and you have to support it. And then to top it all off, you had the betrayal and complicity of the Arab states of the region. Egypt, which is the second largest recipient of US foreign aid, and that receives that aid strictly for the purpose of acting as the security buffer on the southern border of the Israeli regime. And Saudi Arabia, which was in the middle of negotiations with the US, as you see MBS in Washington now, to be named a major non-NATO ally of the US, which means that the US will come to its defense whenever the regime in Saudi is threatened, and was in the middle of negotiations for these advanced US fighter jets and so on. So Egypt and Saudi and the other Gulf monarchies working very hard, saying, and with the rest of the Arab group ultimately, saying this is our position as well, we have to support this. So to the point that even Algeria, which had been the tip of the spear in defending Palestinian rights inside the Security Council, voted for this atrocity alongside three other Muslim countries, Pakistan, Somalia, and Sierra Leone, which is a majority Muslim country, and of course all the other countries that inquired with the Palestinian Authority and with the Arabs, all told to go along with it. There's your perfect storm of complicity that resulted in this unlawful action by the UN Security Council.
It's pretty handy how they have the official spokesperson of the Palestinian state essentially controlled by US foreign policy. It's funny how it works like that. But, I think it's, the result you get is almost flawless for them. But, of course, this whole question of the UNSC vote and what really happened in that day brings us back to the question of the role of the United Nations. It had been the forum for colonized nations to take their struggles, their anti-colonial struggles, to an international stage. I mean, there is a past in the UN Charter. It talks about the right of colonized people to fight for their liberation. But, as you noted, when you resigned from the UN in October 2023 in a really, heroic move, what is the UN actually serving to do? And what is its role now when we're seeing such atrocities unfold? So with this latest kind of blunder, with this latest sort of sham that the UN has rubber stamped, has approved, what is the role of the UN, and can it kind of return to its roots in any way?
Yeah, I don't want to skip over something you said very quickly there, Zoe, but before getting to the UN, which is this issue of the right of Palestinians to resistance, including the use of armed force in that resistance, which is a right guaranteed under international law when you are confronting foreign occupation, colonial domination, or racist regimes. That has been the core of legitimacy of the struggle internationally because Israel represents all three of those: foreign occupation, colonial domination, and a racist regime. And so that right continues until the liberation struggle is successful. Now you have a resolution from the Security Council that is purporting to cancel that right for the Palestinian people, despite what international law says, by deploying, by giving a UN stamp of approval to a hostile foreign force, which is to say the United States and its complicit Israeli partners and others, to disarm and remove the military defensive capabilities of the Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, it's another outrage of this resolution. The Security Council has always been a part of the problem. Security Council has failed to properly address this genocide by design. It was designed to not ever do anything that any of the P5, the US, the UK, France, Russia, or China don't want it to do. And that's why it has behaved as it has so far. That's explaining why it didn't act. But the worst thing than inaction by the Security Council in the face of a genocide is an action by the Security Council in complicity in that genocide and occupation and in violation of international law. It's a frightening prospect for the future that the Council, with its ability to use force outside the constraints of international law, has gone rogue and is now going to be, never mind the name of the International Stabilization Force, is going to destabilize further the situation in Palestine. But when you criticize the UN, as I've always been careful to do all these years, you have to say which UN. So the Security Council is a big part of the problem. The Secretary General has been a big part of the problem, entirely complicit, I now say, in this exercise. He has encouraged this resolution and then warmly welcomed it, forgetting his role as the head of the United Nations in defending the UN Charter, the norms and standards of the organization, all of which have been breached in this case. His senior advisors, like the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, who remained in complicit silence throughout the genocide, other senior advisors who have done the same thing, they are all to be condemned. The General Assembly, which has done some good things, including adopting a historic resolution in September of 2024, codifying the findings of the International Court of Justice, demanding that Israel comply and giving it a one-year deadline within which to comply. But what happened was that Israel's friends in the United Nations, complicit actors, mobilized to prevent Israel from being held accountable. So you will know we've spoken before about this initiative in which I was involved under the Uniting for Peace mechanism to circumvent the US veto, go to the General Assembly, adopt accountability measures for the Israeli regime, rejection of their credentials in the UN, sanctions, a military embargo, reactivation of the anti-apartheid mechanisms, establishing an accountability mechanism like a tribunal. All of those things could have happened under Uniting for Peace, still could happen in theory. And the deploying of a protection force based on Palestinian consent that would not stick its hands into Palestinian governance, but would simply be deployed to protect civilians, to distribute humanitarian aid, to preserve evidence of Israeli crimes, and to begin the process, supporting the process of reconstruction. That was opposed very much by Israel and its friends. And so you saw the French and the Saudis lead a process for the so-called French-Saudi proposal that became the New York Declaration in the General Assembly, which was also a colonial plan for disempowering the Palestinian people and rewarding the Israelis. And you saw the third track, which was the Trump track, which is the one that has prevailed here, that we never imagined would actually get any UN authorization of any kind. Remember, these are not UN forces or UN mechanisms that have been set up here. They are Trump mechanisms that have been authorized by the UN. The closest analog is Haiti, where you don't have UN peacekeepers there. You have an armed international force provided principally by Kenya that just gets a UN stamp of approval, but is uncontrolled by the UN. So none of the UN's doctrine or controls on peacekeeping, any of those things apply in this case or in the Haiti case. This is an occupation force that the UN has approved. And I'm going to say it over and over again, in violation of international law. The General Assembly could have stopped that. It did not. And it missed this narrow window of opportunity for the Uniting for Peace process. Now, people involved in that movement want me to always be very careful to say the window could open again. The Trump plan will come unraveled at some point. because it's, for example, one of its weak points is that it thinks it's going to put together an international force, and all of these countries are going to volunteer to go and do battle on behalf of Israel, the occupying power, against the Palestinian resistance. Who are these states that are going to be enthusiastic about that, and how are they going to succeed? Where 2 years of everything the Israelis and the Americans had could not get that job done. And plus, what kind of legitimacy will they have with their own populations if they're seen to be out there acting on behalf of the occupation and the perpetrator of genocide? So that's a weak point. At several points in this, it could come unraveled. But they are going full speed ahead. They have pre-deployed their military forces and set up a headquarters just over the Green Line inside of Israel. They are organizing the same mercenary forces that they used for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation ruse, this human trap that they set up with humanitarian aid to kill Palestinians on behalf of the Israeli regime. Those mercenaries are still there and are being collected to be redeployed in this mechanism. They're serious about doing this. Yes, it will fall apart, but in the meantime, it has forestalled. It has provided a political bloc to taking other kinds of action. And this initiative, for example, to get a protection force in instead under the United Nations General Assembly and these accountability mechanisms, that work is continuing. People will push for that. So when this all falls apart, then there may be an opportunity to deploy it. But there's nothing holding us back from today on pushing in the General Assembly for these accountability mechanisms to be adopted, to begin to hold the Israeli regime accountable, and to ultimately to isolate it, to weaken it, and so that it can ultimately be dismantled through Palestinian resistance, Palestinian steadfastness, and the solidarity of the rest of us working through boycott and divestment and sanctions and legal prosecutions of Israeli perpetrators and mass demonstrations and civil disobedience and direct action and strikes and economic action and so on. All of that has to continue. But now we've got another adversary that we have to confront directly, which is the Security Council of the United Nations. Last word in this, I'm sorry. There are parts of the UN that have been absolutely heroic. And here I would say we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. The independent human rights mechanisms of the UN, like Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur, other special rapporteurs, all of whom have come down to condemn this horrific resolution, as well as the humanitarians and especially the colleagues of UNRWA who have been murdered in their hundreds during this genocide, many along with their families, and who continue to work to try to relieve the suffering of their neighbors. They are also a part of the UN. We want to preserve that even as we hold the complicit or failed parts of the UN accountable and oppose them. We have to stand up against them the same way we stand up against oppressive governments.
Well, Craig Mokhiber, longtime human rights lawyer, we appreciate your analysis so much. Thank you for unpacking this disgusting resolution the UN Security Council just passed to basically hand colonial control of Gaza over to Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. It's definitely going to be an ongoing issue, so we hope to have you back on soon to discuss it more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Rania. Always happy to come back.
Oh, such a pleasure to have Craig on. And damn, that is like some dark stuff, Zoe. I actually want to move right now. We're gonna you and I are gonna have some conversations about a few topics, many topics. One of which is I want to get an update from you about Venezuela, which I actually think is kind of related to the issue of Gaza, because of the fact that Gaza has really, as I always say, expanded the parameters of what is acceptable behavior around the world. Once you can commit a genocide live streamed, you can also bomb fishermen boats in the Caribbean and just murder people with zero evidence of wrongdoing, just because you want a war. And obviously this has been a part of surrounding and escalating against Venezuela. Donald Trump has put Marco Rubio in charge of this expanding regime change operation in Venezuela. The CIA has been given the green light to do covert operations. We covered a lot of those things on a recent episode of my show Dispatches, where you were the guest. And we spent more than an hour breaking all that down because you are a Venezuela expert. You edited a very important book people should go check out called Why Venezuela? I believe it's published by 1804 Books. So Zoe, just a couple things I want to set up for you here and then kind of give you the floor to talk about. First off, we have a recent report. I'm not sure if you've seen it because I just saw it Actually, as we were recording, that's true. I check on the news while we're doing this live stream.
This is real news, people.
Breaking. Yeah. So the New York Times posted an article. It's called "U.S. Ran a War Game on Ousting Maduro. Venezuela Fell into Chaos." And the premise of this article is that as President Trump pressed during his first term to oust President Nicolas Maduro, U.S. officials ran a war game to address or to assess what the Venezuelan strongman's fall might unleash. The results showed that chaos and violence were likely to erupt within Venezuela as military units, rival political factions, and even jungle-based guerrilla groups jockeyed for control of the oil-rich country. Those unclassified findings, supported by other expert analysis, underscore the risk associated with Mr. Trump's second-term push against Mr. Maduro. I love the word expert here, Zoe, because I'm like, you needed an expert to tell you that? Like you needed some massive war game scenario played out by our mediocre loser officials in the Pentagon to tell you that what would happen in Venezuela is what has happened in every single country where the U.S. has collapsed the state, which is complete destabilization, violence, chaos, and jockeying for power by various warlords and mafias like Libya, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. Like,
wait, what? That was
a bunch
us?
of other. Yeah, shocking. Sorry, guys. Breaking news. But I wanted to get your take on that, and Zoe, the fact that just this week we saw the State Department has designated Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization, claiming that this is a Venezuelan cartel headed by Nicolas Maduro. The weird thing is this cartel seems to be completely made up. There's Ryan Grimm, actually, Ryan Grimm of Dropsite News saying, Cartel Los Soles is the most obvious CIA made-up name for a cartel ever. No cartel names itself like that. This was a Langley creation, so finding the leaders shouldn't be hard. And before I hand the floor to you, Zoe, to talk a little bit about this and maybe give us some other updates related to Venezuela, I just wanted to say that there is a logic to labeling these cartels made up or real foreign terrorist organizations, because under the Obama administration, they set a precedent for making it okay for the White House, the executive branch, to basically strike at any terrorist organization in the world without having to get congressional approval. And that includes being able to extrajudicially kill people. So it is that precedent that the Donald Trump administration is moving forward with. And it was actually a very smart move to label drug cartels, again, made up or real, terrorist organizations, because then it gives the executive branch under the current president set by both parties the official legitimacy to like kill people without having to go to Congress first. But I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor to you if you could maybe address that cartel issue.
I'm gonna try to go one by one. There's a lot.
Let's go, baby.
There's a lot to go through.
Girl power hour.
We got this. I'm confident we can do it.
I believe in us.
I mean, I would just say it is all really related, because we just talked about how Ahmed al-Shara was just welcomed by Donald Trump, a literal, global terrorist, part of a foreign terrorist organization. It's like they took him off the list and they needed to like replenish. You just can't. I mean, it's like you have a literal terrorist that they're welcoming into the White House, and then you're calling a president. I'll just say, Ryan Grimm is not the only one to question and to really point out that Cartel de los Soles doesn't exist. CNN actually had a headline that says, "Is the U.S. targeting a Venezuelan cartel that may not technically exist?" So this is CNN. This is CNN saying this. Like it, and a lot of people are saying it doesn't exist. Okay, why doesn't it exist? So essentially, we're gonna get into it. The root of the name Cartel de los Soles, which, like, I don't know, if you read DEA reports, Control F, Cartel de los Soles, it won't come up. because it's not in these reports. It's not a cartel. I mean, you know, we're in the post-truth reality, so maybe a cartel is just like you manifest it and it like appears. I mean, because it really feels like they're channeling that kind of woo-woo energy, just like if you say it enough times, it'll happen. But Cartel de los Soles, the root of this concept is actually, it was used in 1993, I think by a journalist to just talk about the fact that some senior military officers and anti-narcotic officials in Venezuela, by the way, 1993. When does Hugo Chavez come to power? 1999. So we're talking about pre-Chavez, pre-Maduro. At this point, they're like, you know, trying to fight the good fight and organize the working class. So some of these military officials, you know, a handful, a couple, they were involved in drug activities. You know, this is not a Venezuela problem. I mean, across the world, across Latin America, there's top officials involved in organized crime, benefiting from drug trafficking, when the whole region is kind of dependent on drug flow to make their economies work. Remember, you know, like the most of the world's cocaine comes from Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. Of course, that's going to play into politics. The major drug trafficking routes of one of the world's most prized drugs is in South America, so it happens. So some of these senior military officers were involved in drug trafficking, and so, you know, they said, oh, it's the Cartel of the Suns because their uniforms had a sun image on it. So they say Cartel of the Suns because they have a sun on their uniform, and it's a couple military officers. But again, a handful of military officers does not a cartel make. And then, yeah, that was poetic. I want people to really, I want to hammer home the point with lyricism. And then, you know, after there was, this concept was again revived by some exiled Venezuelan journalist who started to kind of spin this narrative. And they say that, you know, they're talking about the Suns, but then someone says in the Miami Herald in 2015 that the Cartel de los Soles is more of a phenomenon than an organized group. And so it's just kind of mentioned several times, but it's not, it's just kind of this idea of there being some people in the government, in the military, who are involved in drug trafficking. And so then what's interesting is that Maduro has been accused of being somehow a lead drug trafficker since 2020. If we remember, during the Guaido frenzied offensive where they just kept trying and trying and trying. At one point then they indicted, William Barr, the attorney general at that time, said, we're putting a bounty on Maduro's head. He's charged with drug trafficking. And interestingly enough, they actually don't talk about Cartel de los Soles at that point. Cartel de los Soles comes... Yeah, it's what? So it's a new cartel, but it's an old cartel. I mean, what is it? And so it comes back now in the last year after saying multiple times that Maduro was in charge of the famous Tren de Aragua. And then they say, no, it's Cartel de los Soles. And now all of a sudden, little Marco Rubio, I think we have to keep calling him that, says, now it's a foreign terrorist organization. So, you know, really, it's not, of course, it's not an organization. It's not anything. I mean, it's just like a concept that people threw around at one point. And I think at the end of the day, like these designations, as you say, have a clear political intent. And that intent is to justify illegal violence. And I think we have to be very concerned of the fact that this terrorist designation is being weaponized by not only Donald Trump, but of course, other leaders in Latin America as well, using the idea of terrorism and drug trafficking to just carry out extrajudicial killings. I want to link this to the massacre that happened in Rio de Janeiro a couple weeks back, where over 100 people were killed by the state police. They went into a favela and just opened fire, chased people in a working class neighborhood, families going to work, all around, and they just murdered all of these people because they said, well, they're terrorists. So, all of these things are linked. They're trying to legitimize just using excess force against, in this case, in the case of the favela, like they're saying, oh, it's this big Comando Vermelho, we have to go after it. And so in all of these cases, you're seeing people using this idea, this specter of terrorism to just say, we're gonna completely do away with rule of law. And that's what's happening in this case. And I think the New York Times article, again, it's hilarious that they need experts to know that if you invade a country and kill the president, there's going to be chaos. I mean, we can look at Haiti. The president was killed in 2022. And there has been a situation of protracted violence and instability in the country, gang rule. As Craig mentioned in his segment, the Kenyan police have deployed there to attempt to restore order, and it's failed. They're actually going to go back to Kenya because this was a failed mission. So this is concerning, and I think we need to ring the bell on all of these things. The fact that narco-terrorism is essentially an invention of the United States and its allies to kill people with no rhyme or reason, and that the U.S. really wants to go to war with Venezuela. And I do not think they're thinking it through.
No, they're not, because they do it's the same thing they do every freaking time. And we will definitely be coming back to this story. And I appreciate what a well of knowledge you are on Latin America, Zoe. And people should be following People's Dispatch to continue getting the sort of newsy updates about what's happening, because they won't be getting it elsewhere, except when the lies are so big that even CNN has to cover it, apparently, which is pretty wild. I want to move on to another topic I wanted to discuss with you, Zoe, and that is some of the backlash that Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani of New York City is getting, and I think, rightly so, over two things. First, there's two things happening. One is that he is, Zohran Mamdani is a longtime member of the DSA in New York, and he is basically putting his political weight behind or against a DSA endorsement of somebody called, is it pronounced Chiose? Sorry if I'm butchering his name, who wants to primary Hakeem Jeffries, who is the Democratic minority leader in the House. I believe he represents a congressional district in Brooklyn, New York, and he's a centrist. He's pretty awful. And he did endorse Zohran Mamdani, but basically just before the election, because
barely.
Zohran was already winning. Barely endorsed it. It was like a barely endorsement.
He was too busy fighting the good fight.
Right. And there's obviously there's people in the DSA who are very much in favor of him still primarying Hakeem Jeffries. They really want to capitalize on the popularity of DSA Democratic Socialism after Zohran's win, because he was their candidate, and that's a big deal, right? And then there's also an attitude within the DSA, which is Zohran Mamdani represents now, which is this pragmatic attitude of, look, right now is not the time to primary Hakeem Jeffries because Hakeem Jeffries is really popular in his congressional district. So we're just this is what the Zohran sort of minded side of things are saying. I'm just kind of saying what they're saying is that he's basically going to win no matter who they run against him. So it's a waste of resources is the thought process. And that if they do if they do endorse this primary challenger against Hakeem Jeffries, it'll make the New York City Democratic machine go against, it'll be a red line for them, and then they won't help with Zohran's affordability agenda. So that's the conversation that's happening there. And then there's another sort of debate that's blown up a little bit about Jessica Tisch, the NYPD commissioner, and Zohran's decision he said this before he got elected, and he's reiterating it, that he's going to keep her as the commissioner of the NYPD. And I mean, his reasoning for doing that, I absolutely disagree with. But I want to play a couple clips here. I want to play a clip of Zohran responding, it's clip 1, John, about the issue of Hakeem Jeffries, and then we'll kind of move on to Jessica Tisch, and then we'll have a conversation about what we think.
As you've seen, your election has created a lot of buzz. Now that the midterms are underway, that seems to be the focus, but your name is still being dragged into the midterms, right? Let me talk about Hakeem Jeffries for a moment, who now may face a challenge from Chi Osei, who is a member of the DSA. You said that there are local issues that Mr. Osei should be focused on, maybe should remain a councilman. Are you saying he should not run against Hakeem Jeffries?
No, I'm saying that I think the focus should be right here on New York City. I respect the work that Councilmember Osei has done in the council.
But what does that mean? Should he not run?
I think that right now is not the time to be engaging in that kind of a primary. I think the focus should be on delivering on this affordability agenda.
And what do you make?
So here's my thought, Zoe, and then I want to get yours. And I'm saying this as somebody obviously everyone saw. I drank the Kool-Aid. I admitted it. I'm a big Zohran Mamdani fan. Very happy he won the election in New York City. I think anybody who was watching our live stream could see that on my face. Very happy that he won using words socialism and pro-Palestine rhetoric. But obviously, you know, we're going to hold him accountable. And he did win as an insurgent candidate in a primary. Nobody knew who he was a year ago, except for like people locally in New York City. And even then in New York City, not very many people knew who he was. And now he's a national and international figure, wildly popular because of the policies he ran on and his ability to be very charming and debate really well. And all that's to say, I mean, he's kind of taken the AOC line here, which is disappointing, I think, because, you know, her line is always, now's not the time, now's not the time. But it was the time when you did it. Like, why wouldn't you capitalize on the fact that you just won? Yes, is Hakeem Jeffries popular in his district? I guess. Actually, I'm not an expert, so I'm also speaking maybe from a place of a little bit of ignorance here. I don't know New York City the way that these people do. That said, why would you, like, why not primary all these people like Hakeem? What has he done for you? Like, he barely endorsed you. You wanna like give up a principle over that? Maybe there is, you know, I could be convinced, is it pragmatic? I just also think this is the dead end of the Democratic Party, because it's like you have to pick and choose your battles, and before you know it, you're just capitulating left and right. And I actually hope that those in the DSA who are for still primarying, despite Zohran's wild popularity and like being basically the highest profile leader in DSA, I hope they still continue to push for these primary challenges and don't like kind of bend down or bow down to people who are in their party but win office and then start playing the capitulation game.
Yeah, I feel like there's both angles to it. Because on one hand, it's like, okay, this is, you know, why primary him? Why not run independent? Because clearly anyone who wins as a Democrat is going to go down that same path. But yeah, I think you point out make a great point, which is that he's clearly going down the AOC road. And it's funny because I had a lot of people asking me about Zohran, and they're like, "Oh, but is he gonna be like AOC?" And I was like, "No way he's gonna be like AOC." And lo and behold, he's like, "Now's not the time." I mean, it just felt like such a scripted, and it's like, well, is it pragmatic to like keep a Democratic Party that just sacrificed millions of people's health care? Like, is it pragmatic to have a Democratic Party that's so out of touch that it couldn't win against Donald Trump and they picked the worst candidate possible? Like, none of that's pragmatic. Like, why is it pragmatic to put all of this people power into a party that is beholden to corporate interests? No. And so, I mean, it's like I think what it reveals is that, again, this point that a lot of people make, which is that the Democratic Party is where the left goes to die, to die. I didn't want to say die, but it is die. And it's true.
No, because they suck up our movements.
They do. And it's like, this is such a clear instance of that. And it's so unfortunate because also, Chi Osei was so instrumental in Zohran's election campaign. There were I'm like, man, he really just threw you under the bus. Like that is not comradely behavior. And, you know, again, like hopefully whatever happens in that meeting, whether the DSA chooses to endorse him or not, I think the point is people running as Democrats are always going to fall into that trap. And the lesson is, people have to run outside the Democratic Party, and there has to be a third pole that's going to be stronger and that can actually capitalize on people power, that can capitalize on the energy from movements and build something that's able to challenge the Democratic Party. Because when you have the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers in the same party as you are never going to actually push for revolutionary change or even what the DSA is calling for, which is an affordability agenda, which is taxing billionaires. Like, that is diametrically against the interests of the Democratic Party leadership. They do not want that. They are, and I'm sure they have, and I mean, what I'm really curious about is what are they holding above Zohran's head? Not to say like he's this amazing principled guy, like what gun are they holding to his back? But it's clear that they have serious leverage against him. And like, how is that working internally? What are they promising him?
So this is why, no, I think you're right. Like, I think I think they'd have leverage against anyone. I do think, I think Zohran comes from a more principled foundation than AOC. I mean, the guy started the SJP chapter at his university. Like, he comes out of a very solid ideological foundation that is, I think, very different than AOC. And all that's to say, that doesn't mean that he's like some perfect person who's not going to capitulate. I think what stops that is people need to push back now. Yeah. Like, people need to hold him accountable from now. It doesn't mean like saying, screw you, we're done, you're a traitor. I mean, you can do that if you want. I don't think it's really useful. However, it does mean like expressing, for those who got him into power, you need to hold him accountable by expressing your opposition and not holding back. Because otherwise, he's going to have every reason to capitulate, because this party is too big to change. It changes you, not the other way around. It's a massive corporate gangster machine. And in order for somebody to be able to stand up to it, they need a reason to stand up to it. Right. That isn't just their own principles, but actual people power. So I do hope the DSA holds him accountable. That said, there's another thing that he's getting flagged, and rightly so, and that is for keeping Jessica Tisch as NYPD commissioner. This is a woman who is she's the heiress of a billionaire fortune, hardcore Zionist. Her career is disgusting. She is somebody who was involved in the surveillance. She was part of the NYPD intelligence unit back in the day and was involved in the surveillance program that was surveilling Muslims across New York City. Actually, former NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton, you might remember him from the broken windows policy and the godfather of stop and frisk, the racist policy of forcing Black people against walls and stopping and frisking them back in the day. He was the guy behind that. He was very pleased with Zohran announcing that he would keep Jessica Tisch on board. This is somebody who has expressed October 7th as being something that, because she's Jewish, was against her. She was a part of the NYPD crackdown on campus protesters that included brutalizing them, literally going on their campuses and arresting and beating them. Mm-hmm. She is somebody who has traveled to historic Palestine to study and train with the Israeli military, something that Zohran previously had called out and is now being attacked for. She is somebody who has spoken at ADL conferences, expressing her support for essentially the genocide in Gaza as being necessary to defend Jewish people like her. That is how she sees it. She's pretty open about framing it that way. She is somebody who has been a part of the NYPD categorizing keffiyehs and watermelons as anti-Semitic symbols as a part of their training. She is somebody who's behind that. And, you know, I could go on and on and on. This woman is just everything antithetical to what Zohran Mamdani and the people behind him claim to represent. She is a racist, Zionist, like just rabid right-winger, I would say.
Would you say she has a rough past?
Oh, but and so to bring it back to Zohran Mamdani, he's chosen to keep this woman on board. Every single person who has become mayor of New York City, as far as I can remember, Zoe, has taken it upon themselves to appoint a new NYPD commissioner. So he's actually an exception to the rule right now. He's not just doing what everybody else does. He doesn't need to keep this woman on board. I'm not sure why he's doing it. I want to play a video of Mehdi Hassan of Zateo actually asking him to respond to his critics about this very issue.
You said that as mayor, you'd be keeping on NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch. Many of your critics on the left say that keeping Tisch would be a continuation of the status quo here in New York City. She's against bail reform. She's spoken out against pro-Palestine protesters. She's even worked in the intelligence division that constructed a surveillance system for Muslims in New York. What do you say to your supporters who are a little bit disillusioned on this one appointment and say, come on, Zohran, why would you keep her on?
So I said in the primary that I would consider keeping on Commissioner Tish, and then I said in the general that this is a decision I was making to retain her. And much of that had to do with the fact that when Eric Adams had appointed Commissioner Tish, he had truly stacked the upper echelons of the NYPD with corruption and a complete lack of accountability. And what she has been able to do in the time that she's been commissioner has been to start to root that corruption out, start to deliver accountability, and reduce crime across the 5 boroughs. And that this is an appointment that I would make in tandem with delivering on the agenda that we put forward over the course of the primary. That's an agenda that will create a Department of Community Safety.
Yep.
That is an agenda that will ensure that we are dismantling the strategic response group as the way the NYPD responds to protests. And it's an agenda that understands that safety and justice have to be delivered together. This is a decision that fulfills and then develops.
Are you planning on expanding the size of the New York Police Department?
No, I've said that the number of police officers that the department has is a sufficient number. The most important thing is that we only ask those officers to do the work of policing, as opposed to now, we're asking them to also take on the homelessness crisis, the mental health crisis, so many different examples of the failures of the social safety net. That's going to be the focus of the Department of Community Safety.
Just on Commissioner Tish, according to the New York Daily News, she received advance notice from the Trump administration about that horrific ICE raid along Canal Street last month, and that she apparently directed NYPD officers to stay away from ICE agents who were doing their jobs. Has that changed your view of her at all? And will that kind of thing be happening next year on your watch as well?
What I will make clear as the leader of the city is that the days of a mayor going on national television and opening the door to civil immigration enforcement, as Mayor Adams did, those days are coming to an end. The NYPD is not going to assist ICE in their operations, and we are going to fulfill the laws of our city and our state, not violate them.
So just to be clear, if the Canal Street happened again, the NYPD commissioner on your watch would not be directing NYPD officers to stay out of it and let ICE do whatever they want?
The NYPD commissioner would not be directing the NYPD to assist ICE in those operations. And I've also made clear that we should hold anyone in this same city and same state to the same set of laws, no matter who they are or what agency they're performing for.
So, Zoe, you live in New York City. Your thoughts?
I mean, he basically said, like, she's doing so well. Why would I take her out? And like,
I don't get it.
Using the decrease in crime is such a cop-out, because crime has been decreasing over like the past several decades in New York. So yeah, I mean, he just kind of dodged the question, it seems to me. And like, you know, it is upsetting. And I think a lot of people online have pointed out the fact that, you know, he made a really compelling and moving speech about Islamophobia in New York City. And, you know, post 9/11, a lot of people, you know, the horrific violence that Arab and Muslim communities face in New York City, and of course in communities across the country, and really did like an emotional appeal about this. And yet you're keeping on someone who is part of that surveillance, that violent surveillance. It's just kind of, he did a really good job at deflecting the question. I'll just say that. And I mean, what to say? I mean, it's the NYPD. Like, it has the budget of a small country's army. I think, of course, we should know, I know we're going to say in a minute, he is going to DC tomorrow, or he's maybe already there. He's going to meet with Donald Trump. I'm sure crime is going to be a big topic. We know that, you know, the justification for a lot of the National Guard deployments in cities like DC and Chicago was this justification of like out of control crime rates. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know, like, again, I know, as you said, like, everyone caves when they're in the Democratic Party, but I'm just curious, like, who forced him to do this? Like, why?
I don't get it. I don't get it. I really don't. It's disappointing. I'm somebody, I really want this guy to succeed. I don't think he's like the worst person in the world because of this. I think he's making a really big mistake, and it's going to come back to bite him in the ass, because this is like, I don't know if this is what he thinks is going to make it so they don't try to coup him.
Right.
In fact, you're leaving in place like somebody who is going to still try to get rid of you no matter what nice things she says, because she hates everything about you and everything you have to say.
Well,
she's not going to work with you, dude.
Somebody posted like a picture of Salvador Allende like underneath his tweet, I think, which I thought was kind of funny because basically Allende was betrayed by his own army, and it's like, you can't appeal to these people. Like,
no, they've got an agenda that's way bigger than you. You got to be in line with what your base elected you for. And I'm not saying his whole base elected him just solely on the issue of like Palestine or on the issue of police brutality, but that is a big issue he ran on. Like, those are things he ran on. And also, like, I don't even know if it's true what he said, the cop-out answer he gave. Did she really root out corruption? Because I don't think that has been rooted out at all in the NYPD. So I'm not even sure, like, what examples exist to demonstrate what he said. We'll have to come back to this issue. I have a feeling, unfortunately, that it's going to be an ongoing issue. But yeah, I think the underlying message from both of us here is that the Democratic Party does this. I want to move on to just a couple more topics here with the little time we have left. I wanted to kind of come back to the civil war taking place among the MAGA movement that started out over Israel and is now expanding into Epstein. I'd like to play two clips. One is of Marjorie Taylor Greene discussing the Epstein-Israel connection, and then we're going to go to another one with a similar
content,
similar theme.
About something you posted just yesterday on X. You questioned who and what country is putting so much pressure on Trump to keep the Epstein files hidden. And you included a picture about donations from pro-Israel lobbying group AIPAC. What are you trying to say there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's the question that many Americans are asking, especially when we saw information recently come out in these emails that the Oversight Committee that I serve on has released. And we saw Jeffrey Epstein with ties to Ehud Barak. We saw him making business deals with them, also business deals that involved the Israeli government, and seems to have led into their intel agencies. And I think the right question is to ask is, was Jeffrey Epstein working for Israel? And I'm proud to say I don't take money from AIPAC. I don't take money from any special group of people. I'm just representing my district and the American people. And so that's what I was referring to.
I just want to be clear. Are you saying Israel is pushing the President of the United States to cover up the Epstein files? And what evidence do you have that that is the case? I simply just asked out loud, is there a foreign government? And it could be any foreign government, but is a foreign government pushing to keep this covered up? Because people just don't understand the big fight against. Well, you had AIPAC up there. It was pretty clear which government you were talking about.
That I'm questioning that government in particular and questioning any other foreign government.
She's asking questions.
So angry. She's so angry. Oh my God. Dana Bash is like horrified because you know what? No major media outlet has touched the Israel Epstein connection. Dropsite News has been doing some reporting on that. I did some reporting on that like way back in the day, back in my electronic intifada days, because it's there. The connection is there.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it on this show before. But to see that being raised by, of all people, Marjorie Taylor Greene. We've talked about on the show the problems with Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's got some horrible, problematic views on all kinds of issues. But you know what? Why is it her saying these things? Like, no one's stopping AOC or any other Democrat from calling out the genocide in Gaza the way she is, or from making this Epstein-Israel connection. But I think it plays into the fact that there is a bit of a civil war going on in the MAGA movement. You saw Donald Trump, because of her demand to release the Epstein files, calling her a traitor, and that broke out a few days ago into Laura Loomer coming after her and calling her a hoe at one point because Laura Loomer's so classy. I also want to play a clip of Thomas Massie, who's also somebody who's been pushing back on the Gaza genocide from the right, and as well as the Epstein issue.
It's that simple.
Why do you think he is working so hard not to get them released for so many months? What do you think the real reason is?
These files implicate billionaires and friends of his and political donors that he's trying to protect. And Epstein also had close ties to our own intelligence agencies and Israel's intelligence agencies. That's why there's so much effort in trying to stop this. And I do believe they'll try to stop it somewhere else. And that's going to backfire on them too.
So the
So yeah, there you have it. Look, I think it started before the Charlie Kirk killing, but after Charlie Kirk was murdered in a very horrifying public display, you had this war break out in the MAGA movement. I think half of them probably think Israel did it, largely due to Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson insinuating the same thing and all that stuff. You've also had this kind of undercurrent about Gaza taking place, again, because of the Candaces and the Tuckers, and MTG throwing her voice in that lot. And now with the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, it's like there's this Israel issue that is bubbling up in the MAGA movement. There's also anti-Semitism involved there. I'm not denying that, but I'm just curious your thoughts on this bizarro world civil war that's playing out in a part of the Republican Party.
I mean, it's pretty fascinating, and I think Trump, when he finally called on the House to vote on releasing the files, he was like, yeah, I'm ready to show what the Democrats have done. I'm doing this out of goodwill. After, of course, ferociously attacking Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene and, essentially sticking his dogs on them. Laura Loomer just, incessantly tweeting about Marjorie Taylor Greene, about her boyfriend, talking about Thomas Massie, his recent marriage, saying all sorts of things. And again, it is, of course, it's like the succession of events that have happened in the last 2 weeks. You go from government shutdown to Epstein to who knows. I mean, it's been kind of rapid fire, but I think the facts are there. I really want to see your reporting on this, Rania, because it's crystal clear. He did have ties to Israel, and he did have ties to pretty much all leaders in the Democratic Party, in the Republican Party, the billionaire class. It's hard to really get into it on Epstein, but it is crazy.
Like a rabbit hole deep dive one of these days, honestly. It's so insane how connected this guy was. And it was clearly some sort of blackmailing operation. And it's so interesting what's getting cherry picked and what's not getting reported in the mainstream. They're trying to make it this salacious thing that is kind of getting people in trouble. I think Larry Summers had to apologize for the emails that he was mentioned in with Jeffrey Epstein, as he should. But at the same time, this was a sex trafficking ring that elites across the freaking board knew about. Mm-hmm. And there was Israeli intelligence connections that, again, we've talked about on the show before. And the fact that that's not getting play except in these marginal spaces. And the only way it's ending up on CNN is if a congressperson from the far right, gets some speaking time, is just completely insane and shows that we can't even speak honestly about anything in this country unless you're watching Breakthrough News. I don't want to rush it, but I know we're running out of time here, Zoe. So I wanted to make sure that we had time to hit on one last thing. I wanted to check in on the libs.
How are they doing?
Have you checked on your lib friends? Someone in particular I wanted to check on is, hang on, let me find her name. Where's my...
So forgettable, I have so many, to be honest.
Yeah, former Obama speechwriter Sarah Hurwitz. She was speaking at a Jewish Federation event and seemed to not understand that there was cameras recording her, or seemed to be so, I don't know. I don't want to call her dumb. I don't like calling women dumb, but maybe she was just out of it that day and didn't think about what she was saying. Or maybe she is just so detached from reality. She doesn't understand why this sounds so psychotic. But she was speaking about lessons from the Holocaust. You know what? I'm just going to let you hear her in her own words if you haven't already seen this clip.
I think that since October 7th, but really before then, there have been huge shifts in America on how people think about Jews and Israel. And I think that is especially true of young people. So we are now wrestling with a new, generational divide here. And I think that's particularly true in that social media is now our source of media. And this, it used to be that the media you got in America was American media, and it was pretty mainstream. It generally didn't express extreme anti-Israel views. You had to go to a pretty weird bookstore to find global media and fringe media. But today, we have social media, which is a global medium. right? It is shaped, its algorithms are shaped by billions of people worldwide who don't really love Jews. And so while in the 1990s, a young person probably wasn't going to find Al Jazeera or someone like Nick Fuentes, today those media outlets find them. They find them on their phones. It's also this increasingly post-literate media, less and less text, more and more videos. So you have TikTok just smashing our young people's brains all day long with video of carnage in Gaza. And this is why so many of us can't have a sane conversation with younger Jews, because anything that we try to say to them, they are hearing it through this wall of carnage. So I want to give data and information and facts and arguments, and they are just seeing in their minds carnage, and I sound obscene. And, I think, unfortunately, the very smart, bet that we made on Holocaust education to serve as anti-Semitism education, in this new media environment, I think that is beginning to break down a little bit. Because, Holocaust education is absolutely essential. But I think it may be confusing some of our young people about anti-Semitism because they learn about big, strong Nazis hurting weak, emaciated Jews. And they think, anti-Semitism is like anti-black racism, right? Powerful white people against powerless black people.
It is.
So when on TikTok all day long they see powerful Israelis hurting weak, skinny Palestinians, it's not surprising that they think, I know, the lesson of the Holocaust is you fight Israel. You fight the big, powerful people hurting the weak people.
I mean, does she hear how ridiculous she sounds? Yes. Yes, that is exactly the lesson you should take from the Holocaust. Apparently, her lesson is oopsies. Now everybody sees Nazism as Nazism, even if, people who are Jewish are doing it.
Also, she put Al Jazeera and Nick Fuentes in the same sentence as if they're comparable media outlets. He's not a media outlet, first of all, lady.
Her name's Sarah. She's our liberal friend, Sarah. And she needs help.
She needs help. I mean, what the heck? But also, I think it's funny, and I do want to underline this. She essentially said, we've lost the plot. We're losing young Jews who are learning about their history. And I hate to say, as a Jew, but as a Jew, I was yeah, lady, it's not, actually, when you teach people about, what oppression and genocide, they should have a critical lens when they think about the present. And how amazing is it that young Jews today are, pissing off AIPAC Zionists, because it is not it hurts my head, but it's amazing to see that they're actually worried about the fact that their natural social base, which was the Jewish community in the United States, to support the Israeli project, to just continue giving kind of cannon fodder for this, to move back, to whatever, to continue this narrative, is actually collapsing because people are putting one and one together to make two and realizing what's happening.
They're not racist because they're not racist. She's literally the carnage they're seeing online is messing with their heads. I'm no, you're crazy.
Because you can't see carnage.
Bothered. Well, she's the skinny people in Gaza, literally people who look like me. I'm as an Arab. Her problem is that the lessons young Jews have taken from the Holocaust is that it's not okay for Nazis to kill people who look like me. That's what she's upset about. And Zionism is a freaking brainworm disease. That's what it does to your brain to be a Zionist, for you to be that reprehensively racist to the point where you're it's wrong to take that lesson from the Holocaust, that powerful, awful people who are murdering should not be able to murder the weak. That is precisely, she's upset that people are taking anti-Semitism and comparing it to anti-black racism. Yes, you're basically upset that the Holocaust has given people the lesson of white supremacy.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be never again, not even to Jews. Actually, not even never again. Just yes again. You wanted the lesson of the Holocaust to be yes again as long as we're doing it. I don't even know. And this is, by the way, why the Israelis and their supporters are all about buying up and consolidating control over media and suppressing outlets like ours, because they don't want the carnage or the analysis about the carnage and what's actually behind it to be shown to people. So I'm going to segue to that because we have run out of time here, Zoe. I want to remind people to please support this independent media outlet. Make sure you smash the like button. Make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you turn on notifications and make sure it's on all and not personalized so that no matter what you see when Breakthrough News posts on YouTube, because right now we're having an issue where YouTube is clearly not recommending us in the feed. So even if you follow us, you might not even be seeing our content because of YouTube's weird glitch. I don't know. Maybe it's just a weird glitch. I'm hoping that we can fix it. All that's to say, I want to thank you, Zoe, for joining us for 2 hours to co-host with me today. It was such a pleasure. I can't wait to do it with you again. I love the Girl Power Hour. Do you have any last words for our audience before we sign off?
Make sure to keep supporting our media because, while the Marjorie Taylor Greens and Thomas Masseys of the world are saying 5% of things that we believe, we're going to say 100% of things that you believe. And, without outlets like Breakthrough, outlets like People's Dispatch, there's a lot of stories that just don't get told. And we're telling those stories. We're, giving voice to people who are on the front lines of these struggles. Breakthrough is doing amazing coverage of the anti-ICE mobilizations. I mean, who else is going to give you all of that? So please support our media outlets. We're here for you. We're here to inform you and to inspire you because ultimately, despite this being Trump's world right now, it's not going to stay that way forever.
Hell yeah. And on that note, thank you everybody for tuning in and we will see you next time.